All right. Well, typically in our meetings, before we turn it over to Ginger, we typically have a problem round, which is if you have a problem with Power BI or any of the tools or the Power BI service or DAX or M or even something related to data in general. If you have a question, you're welcome to tell us about that and we can help you with it. I would say only about half the time somebody says, I have a problem and I need help. But if you do have a problem, now's the time to let us know. I'm not seeing anybody. Okay. Well, then, if there is nothing to solve, then why don't we go ahead and turn the time over to Ginger and learn about 7 things that will help you write better DAX and understand why.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm assuming that since this is the San Diego Power BI users group, that everybody here has written some DAX. It can be complicated, and understanding is going to help you write it better. So I've put some things together that I think will be helpful. And I've got a lot of examples as well so that you can kind of see how everything is working. And then more to the point, understand why. I kind of, trace this back to, I was working with a client recently and they wrote DAX, not because he understood it, because the first person wrote it like that and they kept on doing it. And so they had no idea why they always use filter, but they always use filter because that's what the last person did. And then just kind of, I had a really tough time, trying to show them new things because they're like, well, but it works like this. And I said, well, it may work like that, but it'll work better if we can if we write it a little bit differently. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. All right, a little bit about me. I am still a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, found that out this week. I am also a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm going to be teaching the Power BI PL cert test next week, a cert class next week. And I'm also doing a tech review on an upcoming book from A-Press on the PL 300 exam. So if you are interested in taking that and you want another book, it'll be out probably in a year. I wrote a book actually on cognitive services last year, and I'm trying to keep up my blog at Desert Isle SQL. If you have some questions after this and you forget to ask them, feel free to hit me up on Twitter at Desert Isle SQL. I'll be happy to answer your questions. All right. So what are we going to be talking about? What things are we going to be talking about to improve DAX? I want to talk about filtering because there's a lot of different ways you can do filtering. And situations, some will work in other situations. So I kind of wanted to review the different items and so you can see why you would want to write one versus the other. Context transitions, generally speaking, if you're talking about DAX, people start talking about context and eyes glaze over and go back to the head. So I want to talk about the different Power BI contexts and how you can, the two contexts are and then, going back and forth between them. Calculated tables, when you can use them, what they're good for, why you shouldn't just blindly use them. Then I'm going to talk about different ways to use relationship and why you need to remember to use it when you're talking about filtering. Talking about what the values command does, because a lot of people just don't know. And then I'm going to be also talking about a couple of third-party tools. Third-party tools can always help you improve your DAX without having to do much work, and that's always awesome. And then getting into doing some performance monitoring. So with filtering, there are 3 different ways that people tend to use filtering with DAX. If you use the word filter in a calculate statement is a really common one. Somebody also can filter using a slicer, for example, and that will impact your DAX as well. I'm going to show you why you would want to use filter versus just plain in your calculate statement. You can use also just something equals. I know that sometimes people always use the filter command in calculate, and we'll take an example. We'll take a look at why you might want to do that sometimes and why you might not. What filter all does. Filter all returns a table, but you can also use it to create a smaller table to query. One of the reasons that you might want to do that is if you're looking to do an OR statement. And then keep filters. Keep filters is a calculate modifier and it was added relatively recently. So basically they looked at what filter did and said, you know what, we can make this a lot faster if we use keep filter. And a lot of people are unaware that keep filter even exists, so they never use it. Most of the time you can use it instead of filter and it performs better. So let's take a look at how we want to use that. And basically filter is basically table is using that filter there. So let's take a look at some code for the different types of filtering. So I've got a number of different filter types here that I kind of want to review. And I have some examples here. And of course, they make no sense until I start looking at the different elements. So let's take a look at doing some different filtering. So what I want to take a look at here is basically I'm going to look at a standard calculate here. I'm going to pull this up so you can see it because I know I have a giant monitor, which makes it hard to see. So here I am doing a filter in calculate, but I'm not even using the word filter. I'm just using an equal sign. So I'm basically providing myself a filter by taking my measure, which does a sum, and then saying, yeah, just give me the ones where the sales territory equals Great Lakes. You can certainly do this and not use the word filter at all. So I'm doing that here. And then I'm also doing it here. And in this calculation, I am using the filter statement. So I'm filtering it where it equals Great Lakes. So I've got two calculations, and if you can see, these are the two calculations and they give me the exact same thing. So why would I want to use this filter statement versus no filter statement at all in my calculate column? Well, this gets into the context that happens when you start selecting things. So if I select, for example, here I've got Great Lakes, well, that's not going to change a darn thing. But if I change it to Mideast, look what happens. If I'm using the filter statement in my calculate statement and I change my sales territory to something else, I'll get a blank. If I use just straight up calculate, it'll stay the same. So if you're thinking, which one do I want to use? Do I want to use a filter statement? Well, what do you want to have happen when somebody selects something else? So if you want it to always filter based on that, then do not use the filter statement. If you want it to be contextual, then you do want to use the filter statement. So that's one kind of reason why you would want to use it. So let's take a look at some of the other filter things that I have here as well. So what I wanted to look at is filtering, and I want to filter so that it looks like I have it here, where I want to filter so that I have the Great Lakes, and then I want to add New York, just because. So what this is doing here, if we take a look at this, what I'm doing is I am using the keep filter statement. And I'm doing that because I want to filter out both where my sales territory equals the Great Lakes, or, which is what these two slashy things are, the state province equals New York. And keep filters will allow me to do that. But what if I didn't use keep filters? What if I just tried to use this or statement? Well, if I try to use this Great Lakes and New York, I've written this a couple of other ways just so we can see how this works. So if I filter using the New York and Great Lakes, so again, I did it like this, oops, where I'm using filter, where the city sales territory equals the Great Lakes, or the province equals New York, what do I get with this? Well, this also works. So if I look at my calculation here, let's say I did this too many times. Let me just substitute one of these other ones out, and then we'll just take this. So if I did it where I'm doing a filter with Great Lakes and New York, which I did here. Oops. Should I have filtered? I will get both the Great Lakes and New York for the sales territory. You can see this is the same here. So I can do it either way. I'm using keep filters because it is a little bit more efficient way to write the code. Now, let's say that I want to change this. And I just want to see if I could just use the calculate statement, which is what I did here. Well, you can see here that I'm saying I want to just do calculate. And if I do this, what I tried to do, and I hate stuff like this because I didn't get an error. I said, hey, give me the total sales summary. And then I just did a straight up equal sign, you know, kind of like what I did with this one. I didn't use filter at all. Well, what happens when I do that? It ignored me. Notice that what happens here is I get this total and every single sales territory in every single province. So it doesn't really filter correctly if I say just doing this OR statement. To do an OR statement in calculate, I'm going to have a filter statement. And that filter statement can be either keep filters or just a straight up filter statement. Now, what if I change this? So this doesn't work. So I have to use a filter statement because just using calculates, it doesn't work. Well, what if I change this to, I get rid of this, and I'm going to say I want to filter all Great Lakes. So what I'm doing instead is I'm doing a filter all where it equals Great Lakes. Well, that works okay. So I'm able to do just the Great Lakes. But what if I try to do all New York and Great Lakes? So I'll change that to this. And you'll notice it doesn't work. So if I try to do filter all, I just get everything and it just keeps on repeating no matter what. So I'm getting this total, but again, it doesn't filter correctly for each state. It just puts that same value here. It gets all confused. So all will not work if it will give me everything, but it won't put that reference here. So all basically takes that reference away. So it just gives me garbage if I try to do that. So this is just kind of something to think about of like how these different things work. Technically speaking, they all work, but they don't give me what I want. So if I want to just basically just look at them so that I get the individual elements, I can use that by either keep filters or filters. If I try to use filter all, or if I try to use just calculate with an equal sign, I don't get what I'm looking for. And the filter context here will still work. So here I'm using keep filters, but notice that because I set the filter that I wanted to Great Lakes and one for the Mideast, I get nothing. So the fact that I can't use calculate means that if I select something else with keep filters or the regular filters, I get nothing. And here it's even worse because I get the wrong answers, because it's showing me still the answers for the Great Lakes, even though I picked something else. So pretty much no matter what I pick, I get the same number. So think about that when you are creating. And this still stays the same though, because I'm just doing an equals here. So kind of gives you a method of how to do that. So when you can use keep filters, but know that if you use either the filter commands, using a filter like a slicer is going to change your values. So keep that in mind when you're doing it. It acts just how it thinks it should act, whether or not that makes really good sense to you. And this was really a surprise to me when I started figuring it out, because I'm like, well, I've got it filtered, but it doesn't work. And this is really how it is designed to work. So I can't really do an OR condition using a filtering command and have it work as it does if I just do an equal sign within my calculate. I would have to do something more special with my calculate to make that work. All right, so what this is all about context transition. So there are 3 different ways that you can that Power BI is looking at your data. It's looking at it from a row perspective. And anything that you're doing with a row perspective is an X. So sum X, count X, average X, all of these X's are basically saying, hey, do this at the row level. The column context is basically if you're not using an X. So give me the sum of sales. It is summing that column up. But there are times that you want to switch back and forth. Generally speaking, in Power BI, when you want to use something where there is a row context, you want to do something where you are doing a multiplying or dividing, because there's a silly little math thing that comes up to bite you if you didn't remember it. It is called the commutative property of associative property of addition and subtraction, commutative property of multiplication and division. All that fancy math stuff means that you can add up a whole bunch of numbers and it doesn't matter the order. But if you are multiplying or dividing, oh, that order matters. So you can't just sum everything and then multiply it together. You'll get a completely different answer. So that's when you need to do something with the row context. And then there are times that you want to switch back and forth. So let's take a look at an example of that in code so you can see what I'm talking about. So here in this context transition, I've got what I want to do is I want to look at big sales. So I want to look at sales where it is for customers where the sales are greater than $5,000. Let's take a look at what I did for that. So what I'm doing here is I've kind of nested this up a little bit. Oops. So I've got I'm doing my SumX, and what I want to do here is within my sales table, which is what you need to do with SumX because you have to tell it what your row that you're looking at. So I'm looking at in my sales table, there are two items in the same row, and I want to multiply them together. Once they're multiplied together, I have a value, and then I want to add that value together. And so what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the customers. So what I really want is I don't want to get the amount, I want to get the customers. So that's what values is providing for me. So it's just saying, hey, return the customer where this condition equals true. And since I said that I only wanted the big customers, I'm basically saying, hey, if their sales are over $5,000. So what this is going to provide for me, this is my row context. This is my column context because and then I'm switching back to get the result here. And what this is going to do is this is going to provide me the ability to drill down on this too, because this is going to be set this no matter how I have things selected. So for example, if I select everything, I will get where that's greater than $5,000. Or if I just select all the way down to the month level, I'll get the same thing. So I'm getting the different values. So I'm only getting the customers that have greater than 5,000 in sales. So all the other customers I'm filtering out. So my time frame is different, but my filter on the customers remains the same. So you can do something like this just to get a larger customer, no matter what gets selected. Because although these values changes, I'm only getting these big customers. I'm not just getting every rando customer that I possibly have. So this is providing both the row, because I'm multiplying it to get so that I get just that big value, but I'm getting the customer because I have added values. So it's kind of a complicated scenario, but that is how that portion of it works. All right. Another thing I wanted to talk about was calculated tables. Now, last year, I actually went to an in-person conference because it was an in-person conference. I was lucky that Adam Saxton, also known as Half the Guy in the Cube, was there as well. And I was asking, and he works for Microsoft's Gigundo Power BI customer support team. So he gets the largest. He's presently working for it, and I won't give the name, but it's the largest Power BI customer that Microsoft has that is in government here in the US, and how to make sure that their reports perform well. And so we were talking about performance, and I was asking him about calculated tables. And I said, well, do you always use calculated tables? Because I know you're getting into some really massive Power BI reports. And he said, no, I do not. And I said, really? Why wouldn't you? Because it's so nice to have calculated tables, because then you can organize your measures together. And if you have like the different measures, grouped in different tables, it just makes things easier. He said, well, sometimes there's performance reasons for not doing that. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Well, I thought about that because I was working on a Power BI report for a client, and we're actually using Azure Analysis Services because our report was greater than 10 gig in size of the data that we're analyzing. So we're using that engine to build our measures. And in that environment, which unfortunately I can't demo because it's customer data, I noticed that and some of the stuff actually took quite a bit of time to do because they've got, tens of millions of sales transactions that we were summarizing. If I put the calculation in the table where the values were, it performed significantly better than if I had a calculate table. And I wouldn't have even tested this if I hadn't talked to Adam earlier, and he said, you might see this. Now, I also tested it for my most recent customer, and they don't have that much data. And I didn't notice that there was any difference whatsoever between having my measure in a calculated table versus having it within the table itself. But I would look, because since I have seen it, that there was a difference. And I would say it was like 5 seconds difference, which, can be significant when reports are loading up and you've got a lot of measures. So although for my demos, I will always, use calculated tables for all of my measures. If I'm doing it for a customer, I'm going to look to see how much data I've got. And if I've got a lot of data, I probably won't put my measures in into a calculated table because there's a performance issue. So I've not seen that documented anywhere. I can just tell you that I tested it, and that's how it works. So keep that in mind when you are putting all your measures in calculated tables, because that's a lot easier thing to do. The other thing that I like to do is I like to create my date tables in DAX, no matter what. The reason why is your date tables probably aren't that huge anyway. Most customers that I have tend to have like 3 years worth of data. So like last 2 years, and then this year would be like kind of the maximum they have. I don't have customers that have years and years of data. It just doesn't seem to be happening for the people that I'm working with. And I like having my date table in DAX because it's smarter. Now I know that there is always a question of where you should put things, if you should put them in M or you should put them in DAX if you're talking about a date table. So naturally, I put it out on Twitter where one asks such questions, hoping to get an answer. And I got lucky. And one of the two, who I'll call the godfathers of DAX, Marco Russo, who wrote this book, which, yes, I do have lying around, The Definitive Guide to DAX. He responded back and said, for your date tables, it doesn't matter if you write them in M or in DAX because they're so small, they don't make a difference. Okay. So with that, I find it easier to write a smarter date table in DAX because I can look at my minimum and maximum date values to make it dynamic. So it's not this gigundo date table. It's relevant to the data that I'm looking at. The other thing that I know that you can do with calculated tables is you can use those for hiding your formatting. I didn't have a chance to put that together, but it's something that you can look at for your formatting. Row values are calculated and recalculated when it loads. While that's a bigger deal if you are creating a calculated column, if you're creating a calculated table, it does it on load. So it's not recalculating, which is a good question. So because I'm creating that calculated date table, when I'm loading up Power BI, that's when it hits. So it's not going to do, it would do similar things in, it would do it a little bit earlier if I was doing it M, and since I'm doing it in DAX, it will add that size to the size of my Power BI model. So it's a little bit bigger because I put the date table in DAX, but in M. But again, it's not supposed to be that big. So it's generally kind of a nit. So let me tell you what I mean about a smart date table and why I like writing them in DAX so that I can make them smarter. So in my date table, which I'm going to blow up here, I don't want to have like every single date for the last 5 years because I don't care. And then that's just a whole bunch of dates that I don't need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tailor my date table based on the data that I have. So I'm assuming that I'm going to be doing something with my tables to get rid of them. So I'm only have the most recent fact table information that I need. So here, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the minimum value that I have in my invoice date and the maximum value that I have for delivery date. And I have today reference, but I'm not really using it. And I'm doing this because this is how I'm going to bound my date table. So I'm going to create my date table based on these values. So I won't have 20 years worth of data. I'll never need to adjust it because it's going to be based on the values that I have in my data. And yes, I could do something similar in M, but since I was told it doesn't matter, I do it in DAX. So, because I like the way you format a little bit better your date stuff in DAX. It will add to the size of my Power BI model, but which it would not do if it was M. But since it's so small, it's not big a deal. I have had customers get really, really mad when they see dates that they don't have in their Power BI date table. So I've moved to doing it this way. And once you have this script written, so you have the dates, like every single format that you can possibly do, and all it is a cut and paste thing, and you just change which value here that you're going to use. So do that. So I will say though that I told you that I don't always create, calculated tables, but this time I did. One thing to remember, if you want to make sure that your calculated tables show up at the top, back in the day, you had to always make sure that you put a space on top of it so that it would show up at the top. You no longer need to do that, so don't bother doing that space trick. As if you want your calculation table to show up here at the top, all you need to do is make sure that when you add a calculation, back into my calculation table here, is that, and you can't do this until you actually have a calculation within it, hide that blank column that gets created when you create your date table. When you do, it'll automatically appear on the top of your Power BI calculations. So make sure you hide this. And then all your calculated, if you have created a calculated table, it goes here. So I'll demonstrate that. So I'm going to create a new calculation table. And just to prove my point, I'm just going to call this, ZZZ. And I'm going to go ahead and that's going to be my table. So you'll notice it appears down here at the bottom. So it is not, like I said at the top, it's just showing down here at the bottom. But if I do something like move this here, and then once I do that, I can hide this. Look what it did. It popped right to the calculation section. So if you see like some old school things about creating calculation tables and they tell you, oh, use square brackets and put a space, you don't have to do that anymore. They changed it. All you need to do is make sure that you hide the blank column that gets created when you create a calculated table, and it will move it to the top section. So good to know. So you don't have to play games. Can you create a relationship to calculate a table? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm going to talk about this earlier, but you'll note, as we talked about, my calendar tables we see here is obviously a calculated table, which is why it has this fun and exciting icon next to it. And you can see here that I've got relationships to it. I've got one to delivery date, and I have one to my invoice date. So it acts like any other column. My calculated tables, while I could do that, that's a fundamentally bad idea These are basically just containers. So don't join these to anything if you are creating calculation tables per se. So there's no need to do that. You can just leave them up here. The other thing, if you're looking at, again, at old school Power BI, it was really difficult to move elements from one place to another if you accidentally stuck them in the wrong table. But now it's gotten to be really, really easy to do. All you need to do is not be in the model view. And you can change any calculation that you want by just changing where you want it to be. So I could put it to any table. And if I do that and I want to put it back, just do that. So it's really gotten easy to move. So keep that in mind. Again, this is in measure tools where you can easily move your measures around if you decide that you don't like them. If you don't, generally speaking, what I do a lot when I create calculations is I start out with one big table, and then if I get a lot of them, then I'll probably break it into two. I've never had a problem with doing this because, as you know, you cannot create two calculations with the same name. So it's not possible for me to create a sales total sum calculation and put it in another place. Power BI will not let me to do this. It is for this reason that I never reference the name of the columns. Well, recently I was working with a bunch of junior Power BI developers, and they referenced the name of the calculation when they were calling it, which meant that when I tried to move it, I had all these errors. I do not recommend, although it's considered good practice to do something like this, where I include the table name. That's not true for calculations. For calculations, don't include the table name. Just don't. You don't need it. It's redundant. Only include the table name if it is a table and acting as a table. Yes, I will include like calendar, for example. Here I'm referencing calendar because that's acting as a table. But if I'm using an actual calculation, do not reference the calculation name because you don't need it. It's not buying you anything, and it makes it harder to reorganize them if later on you should decide to do that. So, all right. Any other questions that I didn't answer already? Okay. So next thing I want to talk about is values. So values is basically something that you can use a lot in calculations, and I was looking at things and noticed that people don't remember. Oh, here's an example, perfect example. This is something that I have included in my calculation table, but I'm not referencing the name because I don't need to. And I want to filter so that I'm just calculating years. So I'm going to filter the calendar table, again, using another statement that you can use with the all statement with no filter. And then I'm just going to say, just only give me out of this table, just give me just calendar year. So that is an example of when you can just use that. Next thing I want to talk about is use relationship. So the reason that I wanted to include this is because I have recently had a customer, and they didn't know that while at one point in time, people created Power BI models, and they had 6, 7, they had 14, no joke, different date tables that they joined to different places, and every time you add another date table, you increase the size of your Power BI model. So while 1 is not that big of a deal, when you start getting like 14, it gets to be a problem. Plus, you're kind of limited in some of the calculations that you can do. So you want to make sure that you take advantage of the use relationship DAX statement instead of adding the same table in multiple times. And you want to make sure that you've included this even when you don't think you need to, because it helps to ensure that other items filter correctly when you are using other filters on a Power BI page. So let me show you what I mean about that. So here I've got a page where I'm looking at the use relationship. And to do this, I want to talk about my model. Because here you can see that I have a inactive and an active relationship. So if I click on this, you'll see that my date is an active, invoice date is an active relationship. If we look at my delivery date, that is an inactive relationship. Obviously, because I've got one table that I'm trying to join to sales, that uses what's called role plane dimensions. I can only do that with the date table from one value, the other one is inactive. I can and have had many different inactive relationships as far as many different date tables as I have here. And I will say that while I should change this so that it's a date, because I don't care about the times, because it doesn't matter. Notice that either of these different formats will work, even though to be of good form, I should have changed both of these to this short date format. Don't have to, still works, because this is not changing the underlying date. It is changing the data. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, while I should, to be good form with my date table, I should make sure that this is marked as a date table, which it is. In previous versions of Power BI, nothing would work if it wasn't set to mark as date table. Anymore, I don't know why you need to mark it as date table, because everything works without it. So if you forget to do it, it doesn't seem to matter. So let's take a look at my use relationship with these different with my slicer, and talk about how that interacts. So because my delivery, so let's take a look at my DAX that I have here. So if we look at total sales price, what I have is this is using SumX to basically taking my quantity times my unit price to get my price. And then I am, I didn't need to do calculate really on this. I could have just left that alone. And I probably should just change that. So what this is doing is, this is just giving me my unit price. So what this is going to do in this scenario is this is going to use the active relationship. It will always use the active relationship because it didn't tell us to do anything else. So what I have done here, though, is I have used my relationship. So you'll notice that the values are different. They're different is because the dates are different. So I've got, if I'm looking at for the total sales for price, this is going to use by default the invoice amount, and this is using the delivery amount. So I will get different values. And I need to make sure that here I'm doing use relationship between the sales delivery date and the calendar date, so that I'm making sure that I have that working. So if I use the previous year sales price, what that is just doing is this is using the same period last year. Now, I'm saying same period last year using my calendar date. So I don't have anything earlier than this, so that you can see this is why these different elements change. And actually, in my calculation here, I'm going to go all the way down to the date. So I want to change this to matrix so we can, and then I'm going to make sure that I don't screw it in. So we can drill down here. So now we can kind of drill down, makes it some things easier to see. So I've got, you can see that this is the, and I'm going to sort year. And if it's sort by year, then it's really easy to see that this all works out like you would expect. So this is the previous year, so forth and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing for delivery. So what I need to make sure that I do with delivery is make sure that I include that use relationship. So if we look at this calculation, I need to use my calendar date and the sales delivery date, and then the sales period last year. Now I'm going to change this so that I don't do that. So I'm going to drop this on my right here so we can see the difference. And we see the numbers work out as we would expect. Now I'm seeing, I've got years here that I don't have in my calendar because I've used the way that I did my dates. So that's why I have something here that I don't have in the other ones. But if I was to check out this use relationship and just use the same period last year, notice my numbers change. So it's not giving me what I want. I still have to make sure, even if I'm doing something like this, that I maintain that use relationships so that my calculations work correctly. So always make sure that you do that. And the reason that we want to do this is if we go all the way down to we look at January and go down to the dates. Notice that I will get delivery. I'll get dates here. The totals will be totally different on the day level because it goes all the way down to this level. So make sure that you use that in all of your calculations because it matters. All right, now one of the other things that I wanted to talk about is a couple of tools to make your life easier. And DAX Studio is the one that you've probably heard the most about. It's a great tool for analyzing what Power BI is doing. And if you install it, it will include itself in Power BI external tools. And you can do review performance with it. And I know a lot of people might be intimidated on how to use it. I'm not going to tell you how to use it, but I will tell you that Alberto Ferrari has I think it's like 15 different 10-minute lessons on how to use DAX Studio. So he breaks down everything you need to do to make it work. So highly recommend if you haven't started using DAX Studio, install it and then watch his little YouTube videos on how to do it. It was written by Darren Gospel, a Power BI and as a data platform MVP, and it's free and there's no cost. So there's no reason why not to use it. But I also wanted to talk about another tool that's relatively new that most people haven't heard about yet. I think it's 3 months, something like that. This was written in part by Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari, and it's called Bravo. It's a relatively new tool. It will do formatting for you, which is always nice. And it will analyze your memory and do performance analysis. And you can download it for free at bravo.bi. And since this is a tool I don't think that people have used, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to use this one. So Bravo, again, because I have installed it, it just shows up here, nice little dog. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it and have it go ahead and do its stuff. And naturally, it opened up on the wrong screen. So when I do that, it is analyzing my DAX for me. And it says that your data set is how big it is. It contains 78 columns, 55 are not referenced. And it is basically telling me that it can take a look at how to set this, giving me some tips. It's showing me how to export data should I want to do that. And this analysis actually can be really kind of interesting because it'll take a look at how much it's got within it. So we can see smaller columns, what location has for me, which is kind of interesting. It'll also give me anything's unreferenced, saying, hey, if these columns aren't referenced, you can get rid of them because you're not looking at it. So here it's saying, stuff that some of the ones that's not referenced. So kind of interesting thing to do. I'm looking at all the smaller columns. So, and maybe I can get rid of those. But let's take a look at this formatting thing because this is really kind of cool. And I know that there's some people that get really uptight about this. So let's take a look at something that it doesn't like. I did something badly on purpose. All right, so this let's see, something that's really that it wouldn't like. Well, it's basically this is calculate all in one line. So I'm going to select this and basically say format. And it's going to go ahead and say done. And what did it do here? Didn't do anything. I'm actually going to select everything. So now it says it's done. So so once it has formatted all of my measures for me, what I can do is I can go ahead and for you how it's going to look at them is then I can go ahead and click on this, and it will just go ahead and send them all to Power BI. So it makes everything pretty, and then it will sync them for me. So here it's doing auto word route. So once I've got these formatted how I want, once it formats it, and then I can go ahead and send them over. And then I've got all of my stuff formatted. So I do that here where it says synchronize. And so now that I've got all of my DAX formatted, then I can just click on this and then close this. And then when I go back and look at all of my models, it formatted everything for me. So if you have inherited a hideously ugly bit of Power BI code and you don't want to deal with the way it's formatted, you can just load up Bravo and have it do all the formatting for you and then bring it back. In addition to doing different analysis. And that's kind of a really neat tool. Haven't seen anybody else talk about it, so I definitely wanted to bring that one up. And I hope that you download it. Again, free, awesome stuff. A cool tool for you to use. And I don't think there's very many videos for it as well. So I want to talk a little bit about performance analysis and give you another tool to look at if you haven't looked at the tools from within Power BI and using it to analyze performance. You can also use that tool within DAX Studio. And I really like it because it shows you how the visuals work, which is a really neat thing and a great way to analyze what's going on. So to do that, I have a different Power BI report that I want to look at. And as you can tell from the way that this particular Power BI is formatted, notice I don't have any data. And the reason that I don't have any data is this is direct query. Of course, the other way that I could find out this was direct query is look here in advanced. And it says, look, direct query. And all of these are direct query. Now, I've recently had to do quite a bit with direct query because they wanted their data like this. So I have gotten into this. And one thing to keep in mind with direct query is while reseller sales is updated like by the second, maybe, date's not. Product is probably, if it's updated like once a week, I'd be surprised. But I update mine like every 4 hours at my customer site. So that is something that you might want to keep in mind. And the difference that I can show you is rather dramatic with direct query. So I wanted to do that. So the performance analyzer tool is, of course, here under view, and then I click on performance analyzer. And if you're hearing from your customers, hey, this report is really, really slow, how do I fix that? I'm going to go ahead and do a save as before. So I have my perfect little one up here first. Call this end. Because I'm going to change this. So there's a couple things that you need to do. First thing that you want to do is that while I dearly love all sorts of fun and exciting visuals that you can download into Power BI, sometimes just because I got a blue check on next to them, for example, does not mean they're fast, doesn't mean they're good, just means they don't have any viruses in them. So it's no reflection on how quickly that it loads or anything. So what you want to do is in order to do performance analysis, the first thing you want to do is create a blank page. And as you know, with Power BI, and this is really kind of annoying when you do this, it will always open up on the page that you save it on. So save it on a blank page and then get out of it and get back into it. And when I do, oh shoot, where did I want? because I put N somewhere else and I don't know where I left it off. That's okay. I can actually use Power BI window. Put it. Should show me where it is. There it is. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open this. And when I do, it's going to show up on this blank page. Well, I know there's nothing here. So this is where I want to start out. So now that I got my blank page, I'm going to go ahead and say start recording. So I'm going to record my visuals. So I'm going to go here to my first page, and then I'm going to see everything that gets loaded. So we can see that I have my slicer, sales by category, sales by month. And if I change this, I can see what changing the slicer will do. And so I have some different evaluations that I can do. So I'm going to go ahead and say stop, and we'll take a look at what it did when I changed the slicer. I'm going to go ahead and copy my query because it's the only way I can see what's going on. And I'm going to go ahead and paste it into Notepad++. And this is all of the DAX that is run every single time this loads. So you can see what it's doing is it's creating some variables, evaluating, and then because I'm using direct query, it's created this SQL statement, and it is going to go get fiscal year from my date table. So this is the SQL that it is generating to do that. And that is because I grabbed the slicer, so it's grabbing this. So this is that DAX. And if I can look at the sales by category, take a look at that DAX. This is the SQL that it is generating for that. And one thing that I didn't do on previous thing, but if you change your filter to keep filtered, you may notice as much as 100 milliseconds faster when you do it. So go ahead and test that out with Performance Analyzer to see what modifying your DAX can do. So in my case, since I'm doing direct query, it is primarily going back to SQL, and I'm not seeing a whole bunch of DAX that I'm doing for this because, to be quite honest, this is all implicit anyway. And so, sales by month, same thing. Copy this query, and we can take a look at what it's doing. So what I want to do is I don't want it to go all the way back to the date table if I can keep it from doing that, because it doesn't really need to go back to my SQL server and come back to do that. So what I'm going to do is I am going to change this from direct query, and I want to just import it. So it's going to make me do dual, saying, hey, this is going to refresh tables, which is going to take time depending on data volume. It's a date table. And what I'm going to do in the Power BI service is I'm going to refresh these probably, I don't know, a couple times a day so that I'll get any updates that I can get. I always also do this with security tables because the performance impact that you have with doing row level security on anything you have in our database, you don't want to do that. It's really makes everything really slow. So now that I have made these imported, now I can do the same thing. And I'm going to go ahead and start recording again. And now when I change the slicer, and take a look at what it's doing when I do this, I can see that looking at my sales by, if we're looking at my slicer, it's really significantly impacted. And the reason why is that if our sales by month, if we take a look at what it's doing now, we'll notice that it's just basically getting the date. So it's not going back there. So it's decreasing what it has to do because of how it's being done. So it's why takes a lot less time. So that is my performance analyzer and how I improved it by just basically importing those tables, which is why now I do see my model view here. All right, so we took a look at filtering, calculated tables, performance monitoring, third-party tools. Hopefully you check out Bravo. It's really cool, does a lot of neat things, and it's even more mindless than DAX Studio. Importance of using use relationship, why you want to use values, and looking at the different context transitions so you see how things work and getting the idea of row versus column. And with that, I just want to open this up to any questions. If you do have a travel budget and you're looking to spend all of your training by the end of the year, I am doing an entire day of DAX at a conference with Ike on December 4th in Las Vegas, and that's the Azure Data Conference. So if you are interested in more DAX, maybe you'll want to check that out. So anybody else have any questions?
And if you want a discount off of that conference,
No.
you can either use the passcode Grant or the passcode Ellis to get, I think it's $50 or $150 off.
I was going to ask you if I had a passcode because I saw that you did.
Yes, you do, Grant.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That was the other thing I was trying to remember to ask you. So if you do something later, yeah, go ahead.
So Ginger, I was just wondering, do you have like a particular process or a favorite debugging method for DAX that you like to use?
So what I like to do with DAX is that I find that I actually do a lot of playing around in AdventureWorks because I get sometimes a customer data gets me very confused, and if I can figure out how to do something simple on a simpler data set, then I can apply it there. The other thing is that I also want to make sure to do is that when I'm developing in Power BI for a client, my model is separate from my report. So when you are debugging, you'll want to do all of that in your data Power BI and then delete that, make that go away. Before, if you're having issues, don't try, you're going to have to play around a lot in that to get things to be working appropriately. So hopefully that's helpful. And I just basically try doing a lot with grids because it makes it easier.
Excellent. And one thing I thought was really interesting for DAX Studio, sometimes the tables that you think are the biggest on disk or the biggest size on disk are not really the biggest. And that was really interesting. Coming from a relational background, and then all of a sudden switching to a columnar type of engine and tool, that was really interesting. And I thought DAX Studio did a good job of kind of showing you which one of your tables is really the one.
That was Bravo, though, I will say.
Yeah.
Even the lighter one, not DAX Studio, because I figured that you can see that one, but that was Bravo, and it just gives that to you quickly. So, the other thing I didn't get into, if you're doing performance analysis, it does, if you're getting stuff from a SQL source, you can improve your data compression by sorting your data because it decreases the number of entries you have in your data dictionary. That's another trick to get things to be even smaller. But if you're getting data from like somewhere else, that isn't something you can do, but you can sort and you can even see some improvement in M as well, because it'll do query folding. So sort by, if you've got like a yes, no column, sort by that one, because that'll give you the highest amount of compression.
And do you have any thoughts on like query parameters?
So I love query parameters. I think that if you really should use them if you're not already. I can't imagine why you wouldn't do it, especially when it comes to data sources. I still have clients that do all that manually. Why? you can do a lot of really cool stuff with query parameters, not only the obvious like incremental refresh, which of course is going to decrease the load time, but you can also do a lot of things that load up tables that you can use for formatting, which is kind of a fun thing to do. So just fill it up with some values and use those values. So basically create it in M and then use those different values for hiding things in Power BI, which is kind of a fun thing to do. And you can even use those with row level security. There's a really cool video that in SQL BI about how you can hide different things based on row level security. And I would use parameters and tables in M to do that. So a lot of fun stuff.
Excellent.
Anything else? Well, thank you very much for having me speak. I really appreciate
That was
it.
very good. I really learned a lot, actually. And the one thing that makes a ton of sense that I never thought of before is sorting the data so that you get better compression. That is awesome. I'm going to be sure to do that from now on.
Yeah. It's kind of a dumb trick, but I like dumb tricks.
Yeah, me too. Me too. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ginger. We'll be sure to have you back as often as you want to be back here.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and we'll see you next month.
You have a good evening. Thank you.
Bye-bye.